What is spirituality? I want to explore this question, especially from the perspective of someone who is scientifically minded, rationally minded, atheistic, and would otherwise consider spirituality to be something woo-woo and something irrational and something not worthy of serious study or consideration. I was that way not too long ago. As little as 5 years ago, if I saw a video or a book that mentioned spirituality, I would immediately skip on to the next thing, because in my mind, I knew that spirituality was just a label for this entire domain of fantastical and imaginary things which don't really exist, which have nothing to do with science and rationality, and therefore not worthy of serious consideration. So I just skip it. I was very averse to this word. In fact, I hated this word for a very long time, for most of my life, until I did more personal development work and things changed for me. And I realized what spirituality really means. And so I want to help you to wrap your mind around that. So this is the no bullshit guide to spirituality. Why does the word spirituality exist at all? What is it pointing to? This word is pointing to something. And it's pointing to something more than just a fictional realm of fairy tale creatures and biblical stories. That's not quite what spirituality is. In fact, I hated this word spirituality so much that when I went through life coach training around 5 years ago, and I graduated and I got my certificate and I started to coach clients one-on-one, started making a little bit of money doing that. And one of the first tools or assessments that they give you when you go through this coach training is called the Wheel of Life. And I would give this tool to new clients that I took on. And basically, it was just a simple assessment to help clients understand where they are in their life and maybe where they need some more work in their life, some more personal development work. And the way it worked was there were like 8 spokes on this wheel, each spoke corresponding to a different domain or facet of someone's life. So it might include family, relationships, sexuality, maybe career, business, health and fitness, yada, yada, yada. And finally, there was one spoke called spirituality. I didn't like the word or concept of spirituality so much that I actually created my own Wheel of Life where I removed the spirituality spoke and replaced it with something else. So that's how much I didn't like this word. I was very averse because I was an atheist for most of my life. So, what does spirituality really mean? A much better word, and in fact, I wish I had used this word in my past episodes more, is metaphysics. Metaphysics. Metaphysics is actually synonymous and identical with spirituality. These are the same pursuit. Of course, most people don't understand that this is the same pursuit. And of course, metaphysics itself has taken on a lot of negative connotations in the way that spirituality has. So for an atheistically minded, rationally minded, scientifically minded person, the word spirituality has a negative connotation in the sense that it's referring to an imaginary domain of wishful thinking. And the word metaphysics also has a negative connotation because science split itself off from metaphysics maybe 200-300 years ago, historically speaking, in the West. And so now when a scientist hears the word metaphysics, in their mind, that refers to all sorts of abstract speculations about things which are unempirical and which you can't possibly know. And so that also supposedly refers to some imaginary domain of things that can't be tested or falsified and therefore have no practical value and are of no value to serious scientific inquiry. Now, this is a very wrong notion of what metaphysics is. That's not what metaphysics is. What metaphysics really is an investigation into the fundamental nature of existence. And what differentiates metaphysics from science is that science actually stays mostly on the surface. It questions physical phenomena and it tries to go out there and measure it and to quantify it and to put it into forms of equations and theories and so forth. And that's all good. There's nothing wrong with that. But metaphysics is something deeper. Metaphysics is actually asking about the substance of things. It's asking about what things really are. It's asking questions like, why does existence exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? Where did it come from? And how could it have even arisen in the first place? And what is energy? What is matter? What are atoms? What are quarks, if those are the things you think the universe is made out of? Or what is information? What is it really? Not an equation. Don't give me an equation. What is it really? What is the equation? What is a thought? What is the brain? What is the body? What is matter? What is physicality? What is time? What is space? They're really deep questions. Now, the mistake many scientifically minded people make is they think, well, Leo, that's all nice and good. You can sit around and navel gaze all you want, and you can philosophize till the cows come home, but you'll never answer any of these questions really, because these are meaningless questions. Sure, they're entertaining to think about. Sometimes we like to think about them, but really, nobody can answer these questions. Human beings have been asking these questions for thousands of years. We haven't made any progress. And there's no empirical way to answer these questions. And so therefore, they're not objective questions. They're not within the domain of science. And so we shouldn't take them seriously. It's just a waste of time. But notice that that position right there is actually a truth claim. And moreover, it's a claim you're making without actually having done the inquiry. So actually what you're doing is you're making an unempirical, unscientific claim when you dismiss metaphysics. Because to actually truly be able to say that metaphysics is useless and that it cannot be resolved, what you would actually have to do if you wanted to be scientific and empirical is you would have to go and explore every single corner of the universe and every single thought, every single philosophical system, every single tool that's out there. You'd have to explore all of that. And only after that, if you failed to make any progress, only then could you perhaps conclude in a scientific and empirical way that metaphysics is not worth your time. Only then, only after you've scoured the entire universe. But of course, those people who denounce metaphysics have never even bothered to take any of these questions very seriously, let alone have scoured the entire universe looking for answers. So already notice that already there's a deep contradiction in trying to dismiss metaphysics from a scientific perspective, because the dismissal itself is unscientific and unempirical. The truth is, you don't know whether metaphysics is really worth your time or whether these questions can be resolved. Who knows? Maybe they can be. You don't know until you've actually explored it. So spirituality, contrary to what many people think, is not religion. And it's not fairy tales and myths and this sort of stuff. It's actually metaphysics. It's a very serious pursuit. It's a deeper pursuit than science. Now, again, you have to be very careful here and make sure that you don't conflate spirituality with religion. It's a very common trap that scientifically minded people fall into. There are many problems with religion. I am no fan or defender of religion. There's a lot of corruption in it, and a lot of falsehood in it, a lot of delusion in it. But that does not mean that it's the same thing as spirituality or metaphysics. Here's an initial stab at defining what metaphysics is. Spirituality, same thing really. What spirituality is. It's developing a deep metaphysical connection to reality. Developing a deep metaphysical connection to reality. But what does that mean? You might think, oh, Leo, you're just being airy-fairy and wishy-washy here and saying nice platitudes. But what does it really mean to develop a deep metaphysical connection to reality? Well, I'll tell you exactly what it means. I mean a very specific thing. The problem, though, is to get you to understand what I mean. Because the whole problem with spirituality and metaphysics is that we are talking about abstract things, things which are not commonly experienced by most people living a mundane, ordinary life. So we're sort of going outside the domain of ordinary experience, and that makes it difficult to talk about, but because our entire language And our entire culture mostly talks about things that are within our mundane domains of experience. So what I really mean by this deep metaphysical connection is I mean a connection to the wonder of existence itself, to the wonder of nature. And actually, if you're a fan of science and you're a fan of deep inquiry, empirical inquiry into the nature of reality, then you should be actually quite familiar with this sense of wonder that I'm talking about. Let me give you some examples. For example, when you're out in nature, perhaps at a national park, and you're looking at some beautiful sunset over the mountains, and it's amazing, it's wonderful. And during that moment, your consciousness feels like it's elevated, and you feel this sense of wonder. I don't just mean a feeling, a good feeling or a good emotion. I mean something deeper. I mean that you're actually connecting to the profundity of existence itself and also to its beauty. But again, not in a superficial way of like, oh, that's a beautiful picture. But I mean, you're connecting to something within existence itself that strikes you as beautiful, as awesome, as wondrous, as mysterious. You connect to it. Or when you look up at the stars, and if you're scientifically minded, you know how many stars there are. You know the estimates. You know how many billions of galaxies and billions of star systems and billions of planets and all of this. And you think about that as you're looking up at the sky, and it just gives you a sense of awe and wonder. And again, what you're connecting to there is that metaphysical connection of profundity. You're starting to sense that there's something about existence which is way deeper than we conventionally talk about or think about in our everyday lives. Or, for example, if you're looking at the beauty of biology, like if you're looking at a cell under a microscope, and you look at that and you wonder and you think, my God, look at what's going on in that cell. It's incredible, the complexity of it, the beauty of it. Or maybe you're looking at some physics formulas or some mathematical equations, and the beauty of it strikes you the way that it does many physicists and mathematicians. Or you're looking at some art, some fine art in a museum or whatever strikes your fancy, and you connect with the beauty of that. Or maybe even perhaps with the beauty of music, of a really well-composed, artistic type of song or tune. Or even those of you who are video gamers out there, you know, you ever pick up a video game that you've been waiting for a long time? It's one of these epic AAA titles, some sort of massive open world RPG, next generation, amazing graphics, amazing everything, and you pop that thing in, and then you're looking through this world, you're inside this game world for the first 5 or 10 minutes, and it's like amazing graphics, amazing details, amazing physics, amazing art, amazing everything, and you're just kind of walking through this new universe, and you're looking at it all, and it's breathtaking, it's amazing. That's more than just a game that's happening there. Again, what's happening is that you're somehow connecting to something deeper, something more beautiful, more profound. And that's the whole appeal of playing those types of games. Or sometimes maybe you go to one of those epic movies. I know I get this when I go to an epic movie. I don't go to movies that often anymore, but when I did, when I was younger, I would go to a movie like, I'm thinking something like Braveheart, one of these, epic or war movies, maybe Saving Private Ryan or something like that, and you watch the whole film. And the beauty of one of these type of films is that it puts you, after you walk out of the theater, it puts you in a certain state of mind. It gets you thinking about the human condition and what's really going on, and why are we here, and how does it work like this, and why is there so much suffering in the world, and this sorts of stuff. Or maybe one of these kind of twisted movies like The Matrix would fuck with your mind and fucks with your sense of reality, or a movie like Inception, these kinds of movies. They put you in a certain frame of mind. That's what I'm talking about. For those next 30 minutes as you're walking out of the movie theater, you have that metaphysical connection. Or maybe you're a fan of space exploration. Maybe you're into NASA and you're into following all the latest NASA news, how they're sending up satellites and rovers to different planets, and you're looking at the pictures that are being sent back from Mars and from the different asteroids that are being explored and all of that. Maybe you even have dreams sometimes of flying out into space like some of these millionaires and billionaires like to do. And maybe you watch one of these space movies where you see someone flying through space and you see some beautiful vista of the planet Earth, and it's amazing, and you look down upon the Earth and you see, oh my God, look at where mankind has come in the last few thousand years, and it's incredible. That feeling of wonder of being in space, why are we so interested in space travel as a race? Precisely because it connects us to something higher within us. Humanity then sees itself not just as a bunch of ants running around on the planet trying to survive, trying to fuck and eat and kill each other, but that there's something more to life, right? There's something higher. And in fact, that's why people become astronauts. That's why people work really hard to become scientists. They work for decades. They work for decades to become astronauts. And they're really serious about this because that's why they became a scientist in the first place, because there's something about the pursuit of understanding, which is essentially what science is. It's investigation of reality to understand what it really is. But there's sort of like shallow levels of science and deeper levels of science. The deeper levels of science are the ones that actually connect you with this deep metaphysical, spiritual connection. And of course, many scientists would admit this, but now here's where they make the mistake. Is they say, oh, Leo, well, you're right. You're right. I do have this emotional connection to my scientific work, and I do wonder about the stars, and I do enjoy the sunsets and all this, and I am a human being, I'm not a robot. But Leo, in the end, aren't these just feelings? Isn't that what you're talking about? Yeah, this sense of mystery and awe, sure, scientists get it, but why are you now jumping to spirituality? There's no spirits here. Where's the spirit in all of this? Here's the thing. What you're experiencing in all these examples that I gave you is you're experiencing a 0.00001% dilution of true spirituality. It's a little taste, a tiny, 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 tiny taste. Like if you took one little grain of sugar and you dropped it on your tongue and you barely felt something, that's what you're getting there. And what true spirituality is really cranking up that connection until you got a really strong stream of it hitting you all the time, such that it can no longer be ignored. And it's not something that happens to you randomly, accidentally, sporadically. Because if you're honest, for most people, even for scientists and so forth, even for philosophical people, this kind of metaphysical connection that I was talking about with these various examples, it happens very rarely. It happens like less than 1% of your life, like way less. It happens 0.0000001%, like extremely rare. Maybe a handful of times throughout the year you experience this, but most of the time you're just utterly sucked into mundane, ordinary, dull, grindy experience of everyday life. And what I'm telling you, spirituality is about, it's about taking that little minuscule amount of this connection that you get and amplifying it such that you feel it all the time, such that you're always connected to the profundity of existence without having to rely on any kind of external stimulation like a particular beautiful sunset or some movie or some new video game or something you see in a biology class under a microscope, right? Because those are rare experiences. You can't maintain them all the time. But the fact is that you do exist. So it is actually possible to develop this connection to the profundity of your existence at all times. Of course, the rationalists, the scientists here will still be very adamant and deny that what I'm saying here is of any real significance. And they will say, Leo, but I hear you, but aren't you just kind of romanticizing this? Aren't you just talking about emotions and feelings? What does this have to do with reality? This has nothing to do with the truth. This has nothing to do with the hard facts. These are just feelings. And sure, Leo, I mean, I grant you could delude yourself with all sorts of fantastical ideas about your connection to physical reality. And sure, I even grant you, Leo, that you can make yourself feel happier and better, and maybe you'll enjoy your life more. But it's not going to be true. You're just filling your mind with all sorts of ideas, and all you're doing is like positive wishful thinking. And what I care about is the truth, the hard, objective truth, which has nothing to do with feelings, nothing to do with wonder and awe and magic and mystery. No, none of that. It's just hard facts, man. Hard facts. Like, give me a spreadsheet of hard logical facts, and I'll be good. And I don't care how I feel about it. But of course, this is extremely myopic, what you're saying here, because your life is utterly, utterly, utterly governed by your feelings, not by facts. And in fact, your insistence on facts over feelings is itself grounded in feelings, not facts. You see, everything you do in your life is utterly controlled by your feelings, including your pursuit of science and your insistence on rationality. You are irrational about your insistence and clinging to rationality. That's the irony of what you're doing. This deep metaphysical connection, sure, it manifests itself as a feeling, but you have to look at where the feeling is coming from and why it's arising in the first place. And that has nothing to do with feelings or sentimentality. That has to do with how conscious you are of the ultimate truth of reality and answering these various metaphysical existential questions. The more conscious you become, the more amazed you become at just what reality and existence are. And that is what fills you with this sense of awe and profundity. And that's the reason why when you're doing scientific exploration, if you're a mathematician and you're exploring various formulas, if you're a physicist and you're studying various formulas, it's when you really probe the nature of reality deeply with your mind that you start to have insights. And these insights are what give you that sense of beauty and profundity. And those insights, that is you approaching closer and closer to the absolute truth. So what spirituality is about, it's not about filling your mind with fantastical ideas. It's actually the exact opposite of that. It's removing all the ideas you presently have about reality, questioning them so much that you deconstruct everything that you think and believe reality is, until what you're left with is the raw, objective, so to speak, truth. And that is what blows your mind. And what you discover is that actually the reason I wasn't awed by reality this whole time, but only during those rare moments, was because my mind was filled with all sorts of garbage ideas. For example, like the idea of facts over feelings, the idea of an objective external reality, the idea of materiality, and various other metaphysical presumptions that materialist science makes. It's because I had all of those beliefs that were blocking me from the truth. When you really get to the truth, it's going to be extremely profound, and it's going to shock and awe you. And while you're sitting there and you're poo-pooing all this and saying, oh, Leo, those are just feelings, that's actually you filling your mind with fantastical ideas. So it's exactly the opposite of what you think it is. And spirituality is about developing this connection. Have you ever done philosophical inquiry? This is the appeal of philosophy too, is to do this inquiry into the nature of things. And it can be profound. It doesn't have to be religious or spiritual per se. You can just do philosophical inquiry. And the reason that's appealing to you, if it is because you're connecting with the profundity of existence in one fashion or another. These are little hints and clues. The problem is that people misunderstand what these clues are really pointing to. They think that, oh, well, it's just some feelings, blah, blah, blah. No, these are just the tips of some giant icebergs that you can go track down. And spirituality is about tracking those down to the very bottom to see what there is. And that certainly puts a different perspective on spirituality, doesn't it? All of a sudden, spirituality is not about worshiping somebody, reading some Bible, praying to some God, thinking about some man sitting up in the clouds, or any of this nonsense. It's not about going to church. It's not about rituals, any of this. It's about deep metaphysical questioning and connection to reality. Philosophy really is equivalent to spirituality. These two are really identical. In the West, a lot of modern academic philosophers have completely lost touch with this. They forgot that the aim of philosophy was actually truth with a capital T, the search for the absolute, the answer to what is reality, why does it exist, how come there is something rather than nothing, how is knowledge possible, what is the substance of everything, what is time, what is space, and so forth. This is the essence of philosophy. Not writing papers and debating about technical academic minutia. And there's a long, rich history of philosophers who have undertaken this inquiry and have actually arrived at the absolute. I'm talking about people like Anaxagoras, Anaximander, Heraclitus, Socrates, Pyrrho, Epictetus, Plotinus, Spinoza, Bishop Berkeley, Hegel, and others. And then we're just talking about the Western philosophical tradition here. That's a small list. What do all these people have in common? Well, basically, they were all idealists, not materialists. Idealism is spirituality. Idealism is what connects you to the ultimate nature of existence. Of course, not idealism as a philosophy or as an idea, but as an actual connection. So that's the next thing that people misunderstand about philosophy and about metaphysics and about spirituality, is that they think that all it is just beliefs. Leo, you're just filling your mind with beliefs and making yourself feel good. No. You don't understand. It's the opposite. You're removing all your beliefs. By removing the beliefs, that's what's connecting you more and more to the metaphysical nature of the truth. The truth is not accessed through beliefs, it's accessed directly because it's the truth. It's the truth, therefore it exists. So it is accessible. A mistake that many materialists again make is that they think that, Leo, the truth can't be accessed directly. Yeah, we can have formulas and models about it, but we can't access it directly. After all, we're human beings, and we have a perceptual system, we have a brain and a mind, and so therefore that's creating various kinds of distortions and delusions, and so we never have direct access to the truth. After all, how would you possibly know if you ever did come upon the truth? But again, watch out, because that's an assumption. You can't know whether the truth is directly accessible or not until you make a serious effort at accessing it. And if you do, what you'll discover is that it actually is. And that's something that a lot of philosophers in the Western intellectual tradition have misunderstood. For example, Kant, Immanuel Kant, make a distinction between noumena and phenomena. And he said that we can access phenomena, but we can't access the noumena. The noumena is the truth in and of itself. It's like we have access to appearances, but Leo, we don't have access to the absolute truth. Yes, we do, but it takes some work, and it's tricky, and it's counterintuitive, and it means you have to go beyond beliefs. You have to go beyond symbols. You have to go beyond models and maps. You have to go beyond science, beyond math, and that's where spirituality comes in. That's what spiritual practice is about. So philosophy, especially modern philosophy, is a little tricky. It's pretty corrupted. Just like religion, of course, religion is very corrupted. And of course, many spiritual teachings are also very corrupted. So corruption abounds. So don't say that, oh, spirituality, I don't want to do spirituality because there's a lot of corruption in it. No. That's just the nature of how the mind works when it comes to the truth. The mind has a really hard time grasping what the absolute truth is. So it gets corrupted extremely easily. Now, let me give you some alternative definitions for spirituality. Let's hit it from multiple perspectives because there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And then you'll get a sort of a synthetic compound perspective from multiple angles. So it's developing a metaphysical connection with reality. We said that. It's also answering questions about the nature of existence. We've also sort of said that. It's also seeking of truth with a capital T. If what you did right now is you committed the rest of your life to seeking the absolute ultimate truth directly, independent of all belief systems and all ideologies, that would be the most spiritual act you could take. That is the essence of spirituality right there. Never mind how you do it. Just if you made that commitment, that would be a spiritual path. That is like the pinnacle, the quintessence of the spiritual path. Spirituality is also having a personal union with the truth. You could think of it as making love to reality, having sex with reality. That's literally what it is. And that is the whole appeal of the spiritual path. That's why people become monks and metaphysicians, if they do, is because, see, most people who are so preoccupied with mundane life, they think that the best life they can live is to go out there, eat great food, travel around, run a business, earn a bunch of money, and have sex with the hottest people they can. The monk and the metaphysician, though, is a lot smarter, a lot wiser. So what he says, you know what? I'm going to reject all of that. Fuck that. I don't care about that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and have sex with reality directly. Why go through middlemen? I don't need middlemen. I don't need money. I don't need a business. I don't need women. I don't need any of that. I don't need fast cars. All that is distraction. Let me go fuck reality directly. Let me go have sex with the absolute truth. And so you go do that, and then you actually end up realizing that it's possible to have sex with the absolute truth. You make love to it with your mind. You actually penetrate it with the mind, or rather, it penetrates you in the mind. And that is real sex. You don't know what real sex is until you've had metaphysical sex. And then you're in such ecstasy when you're having this metaphysical sex that everything else becomes ridiculous. It becomes pathetic. It becomes worthless compared to the value that you get from this activity. Union with the truth, personal, direct union with the absolute. That's real spirituality. How do you do that? Well, we'll get there in a minute. Speaking of which, when we're on the topic of sex here, this is a really good analogy. Because for a lot of rationally minded, scientifically minded people, atheistically minded people, they just can't understand what it means to have sex with the truth. So think of it this way. Imagine that you, this rationalist that you think you are, that you like to proclaim that you are, try to explain to me, let's say I've never had sex, and you try to explain to me why I should have sex. And you tell me, look, Leo, there's this amazing thing called an orgasm. It's amazing. You got to have it. You got to try this. This is really worth your time to check this out. And I'm an even more rational person, let's say, than you are. I'm extremely rational. I'm extremely hard-nosed and really grounded in the facts. And what I tell you is, well, look, orgasm. What is this? I've never had any orgasm. What woo-woo nonsense are you talking about? Orgasm. This is fairy tales and nonsense that you made up, wishful thinking. Look at how emotional you are. Look at how romantic you are. I just care about the facts, man. I'm an objective and hard-nosed person. There's no such thing as orgasms. Give me a double-blind study that tells me what an orgasm is. Until you do that, I don't care about your orgasms. I'm not going to take them seriously. How would you convince me that an orgasm is a real thing that's worth my while to pursue and to experience? You see? You see how you're not rational at all? You're utterly irrational? There's nothing rational about you having sex with people, pursuing orgasms. Why are you doing it? You're utterly irrational. There's nothing rational about sex. There's nothing rational about earning money. There's nothing rational about having a sports car. What the fuck are you doing in your life? Everything you do in your life is utterly irrational, run by feelings and emotions. And then what you have is you have a little sprinkling of pretense of rationality on top of that, which is complete horseshit. And it's utterly irrational what you're doing because you're not even aware of the fact that you're being irrational. It would be much more rational for you to admit that you're irrational than to keep pretending that you're some sort of rational fucking, objective truth seeker. That's not what you are. Stop playing that bullshit game. So spirituality is like that. So in the case of an orgasm, what you would do if you wanted to convince me of an orgasm, you say, go have sex. Experience the orgasm and see for yourself. And then I would say, but why would I do that? These are just ideas and beliefs. And you would say, no. An orgasm is not an idea, and it's not a belief. And sex is not a belief, and it's not a fantasy. This is something you can do. And then something will result from that. And that thing is an amazing thing. Go try it. And I would say, oh, no, why would I try that? These are just states in the brain, just chemicals in the brain. Who cares? I'll just go do drugs if I want joy. Why would I have an orgasm? You see? You see what this hyper-rationalist position leads to, the absurdity of it, the myopia of it, the stupidity of it? Everything that you know in reality, anything you cherish, anything you value, is grounded in experience. And what spirituality means, what metaphysics is an entirely new domain of experiences along the lines of orgasms, which you have never had, nor have any of your friends or family members or anyone that you've ever interacted with, for the most part. Therefore, they are difficult to talk about and difficult to convince you of, simply because orgasms, everyone's had them and everyone knows them. And they're also sort of biologically easily programmed into you at adolescence. And so you have them very easily, and so there's no doubt about them. Whereas spiritual experiences, these take work. And that's why it's a little bit harder to explain to people what spirituality is. It's very easy to explain to people what sex is. Also because you can show people a video of two people having sex, and that will immediately excite them. And that's because there's a biological mechanism there, which is very, very sticky, which gets you excited about it. With spiritual truths and pursuits, it's a little harder. I can't show you a video of the incredible, mind-blowing, mystical insights that I've had into the nature of reality. Can't show you a video of it. Can hardly put it into words. It's such a mind-blowing thing. And because of that, it's very difficult to communicate it. All right, let's move on to other perspectives, to other definitions of spirituality. It can also be defined as the raising of consciousness. That's what it is. You're expanding your consciousness beyond your ordinary consciousness that you're doing. The consciousness that you use, ordinary consciousness, is specifically tuned by evolution so that you are constantly just fulfilling your basic survival needs. That's what it's tuned for, including if you're doing science, including if you're doing math, and even if you're doing philosophy, academic sorts of philosophy. You're still basically in the exact same frame of consciousness as ordinary people, as the guy walking down the street begging for quarters. That's your level of consciousness. But there are additional degrees and stages of consciousness which go radically higher and higher and higher, and from there you experience reality in a radically different way. So to be spiritual is to be pursuing the raising of your consciousness. Another way to look at spirituality is that it's the realization that reality is a mind and not a physical system. It's a mental system. This is the essence of idealism. Everything that's happening around you right now, look around the room. This is all mind stuff, mental phenomena. There is nothing within reality but mental phenomena. Not phenomena that's happening in the brain. No, I mean mental phenomena with no brain. When you realize that everything that's ever happened in your life and everything that's happening to you right now is a purely mental phenomenon, a construction of your own mind, including the physical wall, including Uh, uh, Everything that you think is real, when you realize that all of that is a mental construction of your own mind, that's when things get really interesting. That's when a lot of new possibilities open up for you that weren't possible before under the dualistic materialistic paradigm. Again, this is not a belief that you program yourself with, as though I'm standing here believing that this is all the mind because I've programmed myself with that because somehow it's supposed to make me feel better. No, it's the exact opposite. What I've actually done is I've removed all my materialistic beliefs, which have been telling me that this is a material system. I've removed all those, or I've rather deconstructed them, such that now I can stand here and be conscious of the fact that this is all happening inside my mind, a projection of my own mind. And that is a very liberating thing, because when you think reality is a dumb physical system, then there's all sorts of inherent limitations to reality. You think reality has to behave in a certain physical way and it can't be any other way. But when you realize that all of that was just a belief and that you don't need to believe that anymore, then you start to see, oh, without that belief, now all of a sudden reality becomes a lot more fluid, a lot more flexible. All sorts of weird stuff can happen that I didn't expect. And precisely because reality is a mind, what I tend to think tends to create my own reality. So if I tend to think that reality is a physical system, that's what I'll experience. And if I start to remove that belief and now I begin to just open myself up to various kinds of possibilities, I'm extremely radically open-minded. Now all of a sudden, I can start to experience non-physical things. Things that normally people would think are woo-woo. They now become real. Because, hey, guess what? This was a mind all the time. You were always in a mind. But you were in a mind thinking you were inside of a physical box. And so because of that, you were inside of a physical box, because that's what the mind does, is whatever the mind believes is what gets created. That's what creation is. That's what reality is. It's a mental construction. So from this paradigm, it's a very different paradigm from the scientific materialistic paradigm. This is the spiritual paradigm. From this paradigm, now things become a lot more interesting and a lot more fluid. Now, it's recognized that your mind plays a very important role in the construction of physical reality, whereas before this was denied. Another way to define spirituality is that it's the realization that reality is irreducibly, fundamentally mystical. The problem with materialists and scientists and atheists is that they just assume, and this is just an assumption, it's all it is, it's a completely groundless assumption. They assume that reality is not mystical. There's nothing mystical about it. And in fact, if we see anything mystical within reality, our job is to demystify it. That's the job of most scientists. And this is precisely backwards. When you're demystifying reality, all you're really doing is you're tricking yourself into not seeing the irreducible mystical nature of existence. You're actually breaking and severing that connection with, that metaphysical connection with existence. And you're lying to yourself to do it. Of course, you tell yourself that you're doing it in the name of objective truth, but actually that whole spiel about in the name of objective truth, all of that is just fantastical beliefs. Because what you really don't want to admit and accept is that reality is irreducibly mystical. What does this mean? It means that actually it's impossible to know the nature of existence using your finite mind. You would think then, well, Leo, then what's the point of doing metaphysics if I can't know? Well, there's actually something prior to knowing, which is being. So while you can't know the nature of the absolute, the ultimate nature of reality, you can become it because you are it, because you're not separate from it, because separation is an idea, part of the materialist paradigm, which you're going to deconstruct. at which point you will realize that all your attempts to explain reality as a chain of various linear causes and effects, which is what science attempts to do, this never actually gets you to the absolute. It always leads you around in a circle, and it will never stop. Because what you're doing is you're using a finite method to explore an infinite reality. So when you realize reality is infinite, and it's possible for you to realize that that's the case, then you will also realize that because it's infinite, you can't use various finite methods to encapsulate it or to capture it. Or if you do, the way that science attempts, you will always get partial solutions and never the final total whole solution. And so when you realize that, then you open yourself up to being reality in its entirety, accessing it directly through consciousness, because consciousness is all there really is. Because consciousness is all there is, you can access everything within reality directly using consciousness, because you are consciousness and you are the entire thing, not this limited thing that you thought you were. That was just a fantasy that you had, which you believed was a reality. Another way to define spirituality is that it's escaping the matrix. It's waking up. It really feels like that. It feels like you're breaking what was once physical reality. You're breaking it down, deconstructing it until you are totally free of it. And it's difficult to explain to someone who's stuck inside the matrix what it means to escape the matrix. But if you've seen the movie, you got a little bit of a taste for that. Or if you've woken up from a bad dream, you got a little bit of taste of what waking up is. So it's that, but it's that taken to the nth degree. It's you waking up from this thing you call life. Another way to define spirituality is that it's aligning your life with the truth and with consciousness. So the truth is a tricky thing. You can become conscious of the truth, but then most of your work will be not in becoming conscious of the truth, but bringing the truth back down into your everyday life and embodying the truth. That's where the real spiritual work lies. So you might think that, oh man, I'm sitting here every day meditating, doing yoga, doing all this hard work for thousands of hours just to glimpse the truth. And then you do that and you think, okay, finally, I've got it. And it's like, no, you're only halfway up the mountain. The real work now is aligning your everyday life, changing all of your habits, all your addictions, all of the nasty programming that you got from your culture, all of the false beliefs which are still there that need to be deprogrammed and deconstructed. That's the real work. Spiritual purification needs to happen. Your ego needs to be broken down. Your mind needs to surrender to the truth in all the different ways. You need to break down all of your resistances to the truth, and you've got many, many different internal resistances. So seeing the truth once is not going to destroy all your internal resistances. Another way to define spirituality is it's a dissolving of the ego. It's a dissolving of your separate sense of self. It's a conquering of your inner demons and your shadow. This entity that you believe that you are, this biological, physical, living organism that you think you are, this is an idea, not the truth. Science has actually never proven that you are a physical, biological organism. Science has actually never proven that you are your body. Never. Never has it proven that. Because science cannot prove identity. Science can't tell you what you are. Science can't prove to you that you're not the table you're looking at. I mean, it's the obvious stuff that people overlook, right? Science has never proven the existence of a separate self, nor will it ever, because the separate self is just an idea, just an illusion. There's no objective truth to it. It's a conceptual creation, just like Santa Claus is a conceptual creation. See, science can't prove to you that Santa Claus is real, because he's not real. So it doesn't even try to, but it doesn't realize this. Science can't prove to you that you're actually separate from your coffee table, nor has it ever, nor will it ever. But people just naively sort of assume that it does without thinking this stuff through. If you are philosophically minded, you wanted a little puzzle to work on, think about this over the next week. What kind of scientific experiment could you construct that would prove to you that you are not a coffee table? Think about it, seriously. I'm not kidding. Think about it. I dare you. Another way to think about spirituality is that it's an expanding of your circle of concern. The less spiritual you are, the more ego you have, the more you identify with being this physical meat bag here, the more you care about just preserving this physical meat bag, because that's what you think you are. So whatever you think you are, you're going to defend with your life, because that is how you define your life. But when your sense of identity expands and you realize that, wait a minute, there's no scientific reason why my sense of identity has to be attached to my body. No reason at all. It's like all of a sudden, oh, my sense of identity is expanding until ultimately it becomes infinite. It becomes everything. It becomes completely universal. And so as this expansion happens, as you work on dissolving your ego, your circle of concern increases such that you care more about people and beings of all kinds, animals and aliens and whatever you want to care about. It doesn't matter, right? The larger your circle of concern, the more, the further out into the universe your compassion and love extends. Such that when you're very egotistical, all you care about is you and your immediate family. When you're a little bit less egotistical, you care about you, your immediate family, and your friends, and maybe even a stranger here and there. Maybe a poor, hungry person on the street. When your circle of concern expands beyond that, then you care about not just that, not just your tribe, not just your nation, not just your country, not just your religious group, but all human beings and all races on the entire planet, independent of whether they're good or bad people. You care about them all. And then if it expands even further than that, then you care about also all the living creatures. Not just the pretty ones, not just the bears and the elephants, but you care about also the insects and the bugs and the spiders and the bacteria and the viruses. You care about everything. And then when it expands beyond that, it expands beyond the earth, and you care about all sentient beings everywhere. And not just sentient beings, but actually you realize that there is no boundary between sentience within beings and outside of beings. And you realize that the entire universe is sentient. And so sentient, conscious, intelligent. And so basically you have indiscriminate care for all of existence. Another way to define spirituality is that it's a profound sense of universal connectedness. You realize that you are connected, physically connected, to everything in the known universe that has ever happened or ever will happen. It's very difficult to explain and to articulate just how profound that is and how significantly that changes your entire relationship to reality and to human beings and to animals and to creatures and so forth. This is huge. What rationalists and atheists and materialists don't understand about this sense of universal connectedness is that they think, again, that it's an idea or a belief. That's not what it is, though. It's actually a physical fact. So it's not that you're going to program yourself with an idea that you're universally connected with everything. No. What you're going to do is you're going to remove the idea that you are this separate thing that's separate from everything else. When you remove that idea, what's left over? Infinite universal connectedness as a physical fact, as a raw fact of your consciousness. Another way to define spirituality is that it's altered states of consciousness. There are many different kinds of altered states of consciousness. So attaining these states, exploring these states, that's what spirituality is about. As distinct from beliefs and ideas. I mean, actually, new states of consciousness. Try to imagine what that means. It's hard, because most people have only been in one state of consciousness. But again, it's not that hard, because you have been in altered states of consciousness. You've been drunk, you've been asleep, you've been dreaming, you've been having a nightmare, maybe you even take a psychedelic and you got a little bit of something going on there. That's an altered state of consciousness. Or maybe just you came out of a movie, or you were looking at the sunset and that gave you an altered state of consciousness. That's what we're talking about, but much, much deeper and radically more different than ordinary altered states of consciousness. And the last way we can define spirituality is that it's non-symbolic science. So you might think, well, Leo, this sounds very different from science. In fact, it sounds contradictory and antithetical to science. No, it's not. What is science? Science is the pursuit of understanding of reality. That's what it is. You have to understand that science has been evolving over the last 2,000 years. Really, modern science is only about 400 years old. Since Descartes, since Galileo, since Newton. And even since then, it's evolved quite a bit. Every century, it's pretty much different. We're always adding new methodologies to science. So right now, the way that we define modern science is that it's the investigation of reality using quantitative measures and formulas, quantifying reality. So in that sense, spirituality is not science, because you're not going to be quantifying anything. But you have to realize that science is actually an elastic notion. So what was considered science 200 years ago is not considered science anymore, and vice versa, what wasn't considered science now is, because science realizes its own mistakes. That's the nature of science. So one of the mistakes that science will realize in the next 100 or 200 years is that there are non-symbolic ways to do science. Conventional science, the way that it's been symbolic, using symbols like language, models, maps, formulas, equations. These are all symbols. And that's good. It works. You can make sense of little pieces of reality here and there by drawing these maps using symbols. That's fine. But there is an additional domain of science, which is non-symbolic science. The investigation of reality in a non-symbolic fashion. And that's precisely what spirituality and metaphysics are. Non-symbolic, which means you have to do it without using symbols and without using thoughts, without using your mind. So the problem, though, is that most atheists, materialists, and scientifically minded people are so thoroughly stuck in a paradigm that the only way to realize or to understand reality is through the mind, that they are completely blind to ways of exploring reality not through the mind. What might that be? Well, we'll get there in a minute. But there is such a thing as non-symbolic science, non-symbolic consciousness. In fact, this is a more direct version. It's actually a more pure form of science. So while the conventional thinking is that science is hard-nosed and fact-based and objective, and spirituality is woo-woo and fluffy and emotions-based, it's actually the exact opposite. Spirituality is a more purified form of science. It's so pure, it's so direct, that you don't even have room to introduce symbols or models or maps or equations, because those themselves introduce distortion and falsehood and delusion into your understanding of reality. It's a direct consciousness interface with reality, not mediated by any middleman symbols. So those are the various definitions of spirituality I have for you. But what you really have to understand is that you won't understand spirituality unless you have a mystical experience for yourself. In the same way that you won't understand what an orgasm is or what sex is unless you actually try it for yourself and experience it. So we can talk about it all day long, but you need to go experience it. What is spirituality not? This is very important to mention. Spirituality is not religion, dogma, ideology, or a belief system of some kind. Religion is in fact an aping of spirituality. Religion is what happens when you take direct consciousness and you convert it into a belief system and into an ideology. And when you do that, a lot of bad stuff happens. So if you hate religion, I'm with you. I don't like religion either. And religion really is the exact opposite of spirituality. It mimics spirituality, but it gets people to believe rather than to go and experience for themselves. You know what religion is? Religion would be like having sex without having sex. It would be like believing in orgasms and believing that sex is great, believing that sex exists without actually ever having sex. That's what religion is. And you can see how problematic that is. Because if what you do is you program people that sex is amazing, it's good, and you must believe in it and you must pray to it every single day, but you never give them the tools or even the understanding that, hey, you can actually go have sex. Most religious people don't understand that they can actually go do spirituality for real. Right? So they get stuck in their beliefs. They're just thinking and imagining about orgasms without actually having real orgasms. And that's a very sad thing. It's a real disservice to people. Spirituality is not blind faith. You're not being asked to blindly believe anything here. You're being asked to do practices to actually experience the things that are being talked about. In the same way that if I was telling you about sex, I wouldn't be trying to get you to believe in sex through blind faith. The only reason we're talking about sex is so that you can know about sex, so that then you can maybe go out there and find a way to try it. That's why we're talking about it. Not so that you believe it and worship it. Speaking of which, spirituality is not worshiping of anything. It's not worshiping of gurus, people, deities, images, icons, or anything like that. Holy books, preachers, priests. You don't even need to worship God to do true spirituality. In fact, worshiping is a big obstacle to spirituality. Spirituality is not obedience to authority or following rules. Spirituality is not religious customs, rituals, or ceremonies, like going to church. Spirituality is not acting moral, like obeying the Ten Commandments or being a nice person. Being a nice person doesn't develop a spiritual connection, a superficial one. It actually becomes an obstacle. Morality becomes a huge obstacle to true spirituality. Spirituality is not irrational, illogical, or unscientific thinking. It's actually trans-rational, trans-logical, trans-scientific. It's the next stage after rational scientific thinking. A spiritual person can still do rational, logical thinking, can still do science perfectly. In fact, a spiritual person's understanding of science and use of logic and reason will actually be enhanced rather than diminished. Spirituality builds on top of science and builds on top of rationality, but also goes beyond, to realms beyond which the rational can't access because it's too symbolic and too indirect. By the way, you do realize that the only reason you believe you exist is because you are directly conscious of your existence. You realize that? So when you tell me, for example, that, oh, Leo, I don't care about feelings or experiences or emotions because all those are just hallucinations in the brain, chemical states and all that. I just care about the facts. Well, you do realize that your facts, your so-called facts, are also just a hallucination in the brain, a chemical state. You realize that science is a chemical state. You realize that? You realize that science is happening within consciousness? You realize this? You realize that there is no scientific evidence for your existence? You realize this? Unless you appeal to direct conscious experience? You realize this? Try to convince someone that you exist. Run this thought experiment in your mind. Try to convince someone, imagine that someone never existed, but somehow you could still, let's say, communicate with them. And you wanted to convince them that you really do exist and that there actually is such a thing as existence. How would you do it? Come up with a scientific experiment to prove to someone that existence is possible. I dare you to try that one and see where you get. Spirituality is not wishful thinking and fear of death. This is another very common mistake that atheistic rational people make, is they think that, well, Leo, but aren't you just coming up with all these reasons and excuses and stories just to justify your spiritual beliefs, just because really what you want is you are afraid of death. You are afraid of facing your own death and admitting that everything is meaningless. You're afraid of that. And so therefore, you're just coming up with all sorts of stories and clever schemes to deny the obvious, which is that you're going to die and that there's not going to be anything special after you're dead. It's exactly the opposite. Spirituality is the facing of your own death. Actually, it's the rationalist, the atheist, the scientific person who is avoiding his own death. That's what all your rationalist schemes are about. You're avoiding your death, but not in the way you think, not your physical death. What you're actually avoiding is your conceptual death. Because you think you're a physical thing. And the reason you believe that is because that distracts and obfuscates the truth that actually what you are is your conceptual construction. And so what you fear most of all is the undermining of your conceptual foundations. Because if I deconstruct and really question, if we sit down for 5 hours and I question your existence long enough, eventually you will realize that you never existed in the first place. And that your existence as a human body was just a mental construction, a belief, wishful thinking. And so the reason you spent your whole life avoiding doing metaphysical inquiry wasn't an accident. It was very deliberate. It was by design. Because when you do metaphysical inquiry, you're actually going closer and closer towards the realization of your own death. Death is a concept. You are a concept. So your death will be conceptual, but it will feel extremely real to you because you believe you're real. So until you realize you're not real, metaphysical questioning will feel life-threatening to you. Which is why when you sit down and do serious self-inquiry, serious deconstruction, serious questioning of your beliefs, serious meditation, serious yoga, you will have experiences. And people post this on my forum. They post it they get a little deeper into this, a few years of practice, and then all of a sudden they say, holy fuck, Leo, I was sitting there meditating and then my heart started pounding and beating and almost beat out of my chest. I was terrified. Something happened. I feel like I was dying. Yeah, you were realizing that you're a fiction. Of course, you were facing your own death. And now you understand why you were avoiding doing spiritual work this whole time. It was all just obfuscation, all distractions for facing your own death. It's a hell of a mindfuck. It's exactly the opposite of what you've been led to believe. Spirituality is not praying for material things, asking for God to help you with materialistic goals. That's a travesty of what spirituality is. It is not crusading against other people's beliefs, trying to convert them, proselytize them, make them believe in the truth, or anything like that. Spirituality is not about creating or joining a cult. Cults are manipulative, ego-serving, and dogmatic, and actually they keep you from true, deep spiritual insights. Spirituality is not politics. It's not about trying to transform the world into a better place, to save the whales and the polar bears and the environment and all that, and to rid the world of racism and evil. All those could be good things when done properly, in moderation, and you don't swing your pendulum too far and overreact. It's good probably to save the polar bears and global warming and end racism, but this is all distraction from actually going inwards and investigating the nature of existence. First do that, then you can help improve the world, once you know what the world is. Because most people, they try to fix the world without knowing what it is. And then they make an even bigger mess. Spirituality is not preparing for an afterlife. There is no afterlife. This is the afterlife right here. There's nowhere else to go. There's no other realm, no other dimension. Right here. You're just becoming conscious of what's right here, right now, at all times. You're not flying to some mystical realm, exploring some unknown territory, some astral, celestial realm, none of that. Right here, you're just becoming conscious of what was here all the time. You're becoming conscious of what your hands are, of what your body is, of what your mind is, of what your thoughts are, of what emotions are. You're becoming conscious of the most mundane things. That's why it's difficult, because people love outlandish ideas like flying into outer space and seeing aliens and astral realms and this and that and angels and spooky stuff and spirits. This is all distraction from becoming conscious of what's right here. Existence is right here. Existence is happening at all times. You just need to train your mind on it, train your awareness on it, and it will reveal itself to you over time. Keep doing that. Spirituality is not proving things. Proving things is a trap, and it's a mistake. It's actually impossible to prove existence to anybody, and it's impossible to actually prove the absolute to anybody, because all proof is indirect. The truth, the absolute truth, actually cannot be proven. Truth is a much vaster domain than proof. This is something people don't understand. Even scientific people don't understand this. If you want to really understand this, you need to study Gödel's incompleteness theorem. I have an episode about that, the metaphysical implications of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Study that, because what Gödel proved is that actually truth is larger than proof, and that you can never prove the entire truth. That's a pretty significant mind-warping discovery. And what's even more amazing, that he was actually able to prove it using logical symbols. Pretty amazing stuff. I'll talk more about that in the future, why truth cannot be proven by definition. It's impossible to prove truth, because proof is always using indirect methods, whereas truth also includes proof inside of it. Proof is a part of truth, but it's a smaller part of truth. It's a subdomain. Proof is a subdomain of truth. So that's important to understand. Spirituality is also not about constructing elaborate theories. That's actually science and philosophy. Poor academic philosophy is what does that. Not real philosophy. Spirituality is not a subjective romantic experience. And spirituality is not a chemical brain state. Now, this one is the one that materialists and rationalists and atheists struggle the most to understand. Because they'll say, well, Leo, all this stuff you're talking about, it sounds nice, but in the end, it's all just mystical experiences, just chemicals in the brain, just a brain state. No, you don't understand. When your probing of existence reaches such a deep level that you start to question what a chemical is, and what a brain is, and what a state is, and what experience is, what science is, you will eventually come to a point where you will realize that all of those things, including chemical brain states, and the idea that reality is happening inside your brain, that thoughts and experiences are happening inside of a brain, you will realize that that is a conceptual construction. And when that happens, oh boy, that's a profound epiphany. It's one thing to hear me say it. It's one thing for you to understand what I'm saying conceptually. It's a whole nother ball game for you to actually grasp that none of this that's going on right here is happening inside of a brain. You can become directly conscious of it. You can become directly conscious that a brain is actually a conceptual construction, a thought that you're thinking. That's something. That's deep. That's deep. And that thought is not happening inside of a brain. Hello. It's a complete turning inside out of what you think reality is. It's freaky. When you get to this point, it's freaky. You actually start to think you're losing your mind, because really what losing your mind means is that you're actually losing your grip and grounding on reality. You can no longer distinguish between what's real and unreal anymore. And you might think, Leo, well, but that sounds like that's bad. That sounds like it's not objective truth anymore. No, but that is the truth. The truth is that there is no difference between truth and fantasy, reality and thought. That's what it means to say that you're inside of a giant mind. What you think is what gets created, in a sense. There are different kinds of spirituality. Let me list some of these for you. There's nature mysticism, shamanism, various tribal forms of spirituality like voodoo. These are commonly found in undeveloped primitive tribes in Africa, South America, Aboriginal Australia, other places like that. And it is a sort of authentic form of spirituality. They do have deep mystical insights, but also there's problems with it. It's not very sophisticated. It's pretty crude. Of course, there's Orthodox religion, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, so forth, the Orthodox versions of it. These are ideological and belief-based. And these people, they can experience spiritual insights, genuine spiritual insights, using these Orthodox methods. But it's really corrupt. It's really problematic. It's more of a problem and a hindrance than it is a vehicle towards true spirituality, so I don't recommend it at all. Very, very problematic. It's very egocentric. It's very ethnocentric. It tends to be very much focused on good and evil and moralization, a lot of distractions, politics, political issues. It's a big hornet's nest. There's also meditative states and yoga. This is really good. This is some really high quality spiritual practice stuff. There's also visualizations, various visualization techniques that you can use to develop a metaphysical connection with reality. There's also psychedelics. There's non-duality and enlightenment, which is like the purest form of spirituality. That's what I highly recommend you pursue. And then there's other versions of spirituality here, which I could talk about, but I won't, because if I did, it would be beyond your ability to believe, and it would actually be a hindrance to you understanding what I'm trying to communicate in this episode. Because if you're listening to this episode the way that I intend, and I really intend this to be sort of as an introduction for rationalists and atheists and scientists, you're not at a place in your development and in your consciousness where you can understand what I would want to tell you about some of these other kinds of spirituality. They would seem so outlandish to you that you would never believe that they're real. And it would hurt my credibility to mention them. So we'll just skip those for now. A little teaser for you. Let's talk about how spirituality evolves with society. If you've seen my episodes about spiral dynamics, then let me fill you in on that. Basically, spirituality happens at every color stage in the spiral. Purple, red, blue, orange, green, yellow, turquoise. If you don't know what these are, go check out my mini-series, like 6 episodes about spiral dynamics. It's a pretty complex and nuanced model. So don't worry if you don't know the colors. Let me just run through them really quickly. So spirituality, the way it works at purple is that it's tribal and very shamanistic and magical and kind of like voodoo. At stage red, which is very egocentric, I don't even know what spirituality looks like at stage red. I guess you could say like militant Islam might be stage red spirituality. But mostly at stage red, you don't get much spirituality. Then at stage blue, the next stage, you've got Orthodox religion, which is very conformist, egocentric, ethnocentric, ritualistic, literal interpretations of Bibles and holy texts. It emphasizes worship of icons, and it's a very materialistic form of spirituality. And it's all about good and evil, us versus them. It's very tribal, nationalistic. Then we've got the orange stage, which comes after that, which is secular and scientific and rationalist. And at this stage, there's not much spirituality going on. It's a rejection of religion. There's a conflation of spirituality with religion, so both of them are basically denied and not pursued seriously. Maybe an orange scientific person might get little tastes of that spiritual metaphysical wonder, but they will explain it to themselves as just a feeling, a nice feeling, and they won't make much of it. They won't take it seriously. So they won't pursue that path. Then the next stage up is you evolve into green. And at green, this is the hippie stage, the new age, a lot of new age teachings here. Neo-shamanism comes back. You've got people saying that they're spiritual, but they're not religious. They're making a distinction between spirituality and religion. They are smoking weed and doing other kinds of psychedelics, perhaps, and that's opening up their mind, but not very deeply. These people are all about peace and love and saving the environment, saving the whales, this sort of stuff. They have an intuition that there's something higher, some spiritual aspect to reality, but they don't really do any serious practices, so their spirituality is usually pretty surface level. But at least usually it's not very violent or oppressive the way that it was at blue. They don't try to push their spirituality on the rest of society the way that blue did. Then there's stage yellow, where you have some visionary scientists again, maybe people like the fathers of quantum mechanics, Niels Bohr, Schrödinger, Einstein, Max Born. Who else am I forgetting? Arthur Eddington, folks like that. They're really kind of cutting edge scientists who are actually metaphysicians. They're not just scientist hacks. They're not just academics. They're actually serious metaphysicians. They actually think about the nature of existence pretty deeply, which is what allows them to be great scientists. And they're starting to become idealists, and they're starting to tune into the fact that consciousness is fundamental and cannot be explained using physical phenomena. And all of these people that I mentioned, all these fathers of quantum mechanics, they were all idealists and mystics, and they all basically believed that reality was a mind, not a physical system. Niels Bohr, Arthur Eddington, to some degree Einstein, Schrödinger for sure. They start to study Eastern philosophy, they start to study Advaita, they start to study Hinduism. You start to see their mind opening up to this. But still, they haven't really penetrated to the deep spiritual realms yet, the deep spiritual insights, precisely because they're held back by their rationalism, and they're still trying to symbolize everything, still trying to put it into formulas and numbers. And then there's the final level, which is turquoise. And turquoise is where you get full-blown non-duality, sages, yogis, folks like the Buddha, maybe like Jesus. I don't know if they were really turquoise, but, it's nice to think they were. This is where you start to really tap into and develop this really deep metaphysical connection to reality. You can be totally conscious of the absolute nature of everything, and also you're tolerant of all the other spiritual traditions, usually, if you're doing this properly, and your understanding is global and very holistic. So spirituality is different depending on what level of development you're at and your culture is at. So you got to be very careful. The reason I'm telling you all this detail, is because you got to be very careful not to think of spirituality as just this one bucket. It's like this one monolithic thing, and you're either for it or against it. It's like, it's either religion or not. This very black and white, very crude conception that many atheists have. Some atheists are more sophisticated and they actually leave room open for spirituality. Other atheists, like Richard Dawkins, are more militant and more dogmatic, and they are completely closed-minded to spirituality. And they see spirituality as somehow a threat to science, or somehow fundamentally incompatible, or spreading misinformation or delusion, which itself, that position, is a delusion. How is spirituality practiced? There are far more methods than most people would imagine or lead you to believe. Most teachers will never teach you or tell you about the full list of methods because there's a lot of them. Few people have mastered all of them, and usually people are so myopic and siloed that they only experience a small fraction of these methods, rejecting the rest. But these are all valid, legitimate methods. Meditation, concentration, self-inquiry, contemplation, various forms of yoga, both physical hatha yoga, but more importantly, the meditative yoga that's popular in the East and within Hinduism, Tantra, and so forth. Various breath techniques like pranayama and holotropic breathwork, pioneered by Stan Grof. Psychedelics, a very powerful method. I highly recommend it. Chanting, mantras, astral projection, visualization, dark room retreats, auditory driving, which is what's primarily used for inducing mystical trances within shamanism, not psychedelics, but actually auditory driving is mostly used. Vision quests, which is where you endure a horrible ordeal out in the desert, for example, with no food and no water for days, for weeks, and you suffer through that until you start to get mystical insights. Sweat lodges are another version of that. Fasting, another version of that. Lucid dreaming. Solo retreats, like I've documented in various videos, especially on my blog that I do on a yearly basis. Vipassana retreats, Vipassana meditation, reading various spiritual texts. This is important, and believe it or not, you can have mystical experiences while reading a high-quality spiritual text, especially some of the non-dual texts that I have in my book list. You should check those out. Yeah, you could be reading one of those, and it just hits you like a lightning bolt. Bam! It hits you all of a sudden that science is just a belief system. Or it hits you all of a sudden that your physical body is just a conceptual construction. It's like, holy fuck. And you get that while you're reading this book. So that's a legitimate way. So don't let people confuse you to think that reading books is all about mental masturbation. No, it's not. Not if you're doing it properly. In fact, it's very important. If you don't read spiritual books and you try to do spirituality, you are almost guaranteed to fuck it up. Books are necessary to reveal to you the traps that you will fall into. And there are many, many traps. They will also reveal to you techniques that you couldn't learn any other way. Tantra is another practice. Shadow work is important, part of spiritual work. Journaling can be a really good practice. Workshops, there are various workshops you can find around the world, around the country, that teach this stuff and help you practice this stuff. Apprenticeship programs, you can actually go apprentice with a yogi, with a sage, with a master, in various different traditions, from Zen to Advaita to non-traditional, non-orthodox apprenticeships. And suffering. Suffering is a method for spiritual work. In fact, it's a very powerful method. But I won't go into it here. So these are the various methods. There's definitely more than this, but this gets you a good understanding of the basics of it. Let's take an intermission right here so I can take a break, catch my breath, and I'll be back with some more insights for you. You know, when I was in my teens, I used to do a lot of philosophical inquiry. I was just one of those kids that was really curious about the nature of reality, and I just asked myself questions about, you know, how does it all work, and what does it mean, and why does it work this way and not that way, and so forth. And sometimes I remember late at night in my room, I would just kind of sit there after I did all my homework and all my schoolwork and all that stuff, maybe played some video games. Then late at night, I would just kind of sit there by myself in the dark and just ponder about some of these existential philosophical questions. And that was right around the phase where I got interested in philosophy. And I really enjoyed that. It was just something, I didn't know why I was doing it. No one told me to do it. My family wasn't into it. I really wasn't taught to do it at school. It was just something I just became genuinely curious about, and I just sort of did as a hobby. And I thought about life, and I thought about religion, I thought about the possibility of God, and I thought about evolution, and I thought about all this sort of stuff. And as I was contemplating this at night, I would get this feeling, this kind of satisfying feeling of not having the answers, but just thinking about the questions. Just thinking about them gave me a satisfying feeling. And it sort of grounded me, even though I had no particular answers. I was very non-ideological. I just really was interested in what are the answers to these questions. And I didn't really have a preference for which way the answers came out. I was just doing pure inquiry for inquiry's sake. At that time, I didn't understand that what I was doing was extremely rare, and that this is something that almost no human beings ever do. Almost never. And that was because the way I was raised, I was raised in a sort of non-ideological family where I wasn't told to believe certain things. or to partake in certain rituals. I was just basically kind of like left to my own devices. And for that, I'm really grateful to my parents for that, because that allowed me to stay open-minded and to keep my mind open to just doing questioning. But the reason I mention that is because in those moments is when I developed that metaphysical connection to reality. But very importantly, I didn't connect the dots, and I didn't understand that what that was me doing spirituality. I didn't understand that. I thought spirituality was religion, and that was something I didn't like at all. In fact, a lot of the time that I spent in the dark just inquiring, being skeptical, I really considered myself a skeptic. That was sort of my identity throughout high school, is I was the arch skeptic. Everything was skeptical to me. I would question everything. And of course, religion. I had some religious friends in high school, and I just couldn't fathom what the fuck they were believing and what their arguments were like. It just made no sense to me. It seemed completely irrational and ridiculous. And of course, it was irrational and ridiculous because that was religious dogma. But see, what I thought I was doing was just being a skeptic and just doing philosophy. What I didn't realize, it took me years, decades, to realize that actually what I was doing was true spirituality. So the reason I want to bring that example forth here is because I get the feeling that some of you might be like that. You might identify as skeptics. And at that point, I identified myself as an atheist. That's because I didn't really understand, I didn't connect the dots deeply enough. So if you're one of these people who is philosophical, who is skeptical, who is interested in thinking about reality in a serious way, not taking anyone's word for it, not wanting to believe anything, not trusting books, not religious books, not scientific books, you want to really get to the bottom of it for yourself. You genuinely care about the truth. Well, understand, my friend, that you are following the truest, most purest spiritual path. That's what that is. Don't let all this religious nonsense confuse you, because it's very easy to get confused. Speaking of confusion, why is spirituality such a murky and confused topic? You might think, Leo, if what you're saying is correct, and you're laying it out here so starkly and so simply and so directly, then why is there so much disagreement all around the world from all the various different spiritual traditions? If you're saying, Leo, that there's some absolute truth that can be directly experienced by everyone through some kind of direct consciousness, then what's the big deal? Why is it so tricky? Why is it so misunderstood? Why are all these religions? Why is it so corrupt? Why does all these problems happen? Why doesn't science just go investigate it, figure it out, write it down in a textbook, and then just everyone will know about it? Without an answer to this question, you're very likely to get tripped up. The reason that this question comes up is because people do not appreciate just how significant truth is with a capital T. You begin the inquiry by thinking that, well, yeah, maybe I can access the truth somehow. It sure would be nice if I could access the truth and figure out what the fuck this reality thing is. Maybe I can't. Maybe I can. Let me take a stab at it. But then you go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. And then eventually, if you ever do get the chance to glance upon the absolute truth, the truth with a capital T, using direct consciousness and not symbols, what you discover is that this thing is so fucking gargantuan. It's so radical. It's so staggering that then you finally understand why you couldn't simply understand it the way you thought you could initially when you began your inquiry. Then you understand why your inquiry had to go so deep and take so many twists and turns, and why all the other people around you got so confused and engaged in all these debates and disagreements and fights and arguments. And there was all this corruption and misunderstanding about this topic, because the truth with a capital T is, think about this. When we're talking about the truth with a capital T, the absolute, we're actually talking about getting down to the origin of existence. We're talking about answering the question of the origin of existence. Now, either you believe that's not possible or you believe it's possible. If you believe it's not possible, then you're a lost cause. That's it. You're done. You've already failed. There's no chance for you. If you believe it is possible, then there's a chance. Now you can actually do some work. But even if you believe it is possible, you still don't comprehend the size and magnitude of what you're really talking about. This is a massive, gargantuan thing, this truth. If you understood that from the get-go, you would understand that the truth cannot be symbolized or understood or captured, encapsulated with any kind of images, models, maps, equations, even thoughts, or language of any kind. To think that the truth can be symbolized, can be proven, can be communicated, can be spoken, can be written down in a textbook, and then read the way that you might read a magazine at your dentist's office while you're waiting for your appointment. That's how a lot of people think about the truth with a capital T, is they think, oh, well, Leo, if there is this truth with a capital T, what are you beating around the bush for? Just tell me what it is, man. Tell me what it is. I'll accept it. I'm a big man. I can take it. As if you're just like flipping through a magazine. It's like, oh, there's an article on the truth. Let me just read that one. And then you read it and you're like, okay, I'm done. I understand. I just read about the origin of all of existence. I got it. I'm good now. Let's go. Let me go see my dentist now. Let me carry on with life as I always have. As if it would work that way. No. You don't understand yet. You don't understand that your entire life is hinged to this question of the truth with a capital T. We're talking about your very existence here and how you came into being. This is a massive, massive thing. I know accounts, first-person accounts with teachers that I've studied with face-to-face, who told me that when they first glanced upon the absolute, and it just struck them out of the blue. A lot of times it strikes you out of the blue. You might be sitting there meditating for days, but then it just strikes you when you least expect it. Maybe you're going for a walk through the woods, and bam, it strikes you. It strikes you so fucking hard, it knocks you to the ground on your ass from your walk in the woods. That's the magnitude of this insight that we're talking about. I've had other teachers who I've studied with and had conversations with who told me that when they realized the truth for themselves, that they secluded themselves, took themselves out of society, stopped work for years, maybe stopped working for 5 years, stopped talking with family and friends for 5 years, just to sit and to bask in the magnitude of this insight. That's how big the truth is when you really get it. It's utterly life-transforming. It's massive. It completely changes everything you thought about reality. It flips it inside out. It's radical. To most people, it would be horrifying, terrifying, life-threatening. This shit will derail your entire life. It recontextualizes everything. Life as you know it is over after you've discovered the absolute and you've really understood it. You've really got it. You can get sometimes little glimpses of it here and there, but then it escapes you. You fall back asleep. But when you really get it, you get it very deeply. This is no little insight. This is nothing you just hear in a video and then you just move on with your life as though nothing changed. So it's precisely because the truth is so gargantuan. It's literally infinite. But see, you have no appreciation for what the word infinite actually means. You have some concept of the infinite that you got from mathematics. That's not actual infinity. You don't know what actual infinity really means. You can't possibly know unless you become directly conscious of it. So because of this, you completely underestimate what this thing is. You completely underestimate what existence is, how counterintuitive it is, how unlimited it is, how big it is. So the ego underestimates this. And so the ego just treats this as just some sort of simple little pursuit. And the ego doesn't understand how tricky it is, how tricky the ego mind is, how self-deceptive it is, all the layers of self-deception that are at work to prevent you from seeing this truth. It's no accident that you don't see the truth. It's no accident that your friends, your family members, your college professors, your teachers in elementary school, your boss, your coworkers, that none of them have ever glimpsed the absolute. It's no accident. It's by the design of the way the mind is structured. Because as it turns out, your very existence hinges upon you not seeing the truth, the absolute. Because your existence as a human being is finite, whereas the truth is infinite. This creates a rather problematic existential problem. How do you view, using direct consciousness, something that's infinite while you still want to remain and maintain your finiteness? People don't get this. I'm explaining to you why people misunderstand the truth so much and why there's so much confusion. There's so much confusion because the truth is easily corrupted. There's so much confusion because the truth cannot be symbolized and cannot be communicated at all. Because it's everything. How do you communicate the entire universe to somebody? With a formula? With an image? With a model? Think again. It doesn't work that way. You might think that once you discover the absolute, then you can just write a textbook about it and then share the textbook with all of humanity and they would all just understand. And how wrong you would be. If you did that, what you would do is actually you would delude everybody with a model of the truth, your communication of the truth, which is limited, finite, symbolic, and therefore not the infinite truth. Which is, of course, precisely what religion has tried to do for 2,000 years and has failed miserably. So if you think you can write a scientific textbook about the absolute, guess again, you're just going to start a new religion. That's all that's going to happen. You're just going to delude people and yourself in the process. There's also so much confusion because consciousness is a complex terrain. Even people who do spiritual work and Neo-Advaita and so forth, maybe they have a few glimpses of the truth, they still completely oversimplify this domain of consciousness studies, which is what spirituality is. And they think of it as just a simple, okay, I'm just going to get the truth. I'm going to get enlightened. Bam, I'm done. Okay, move on with my life. Everything's peachy. That's not how it works. There's so many facets and so many nuances and complexities to the truth, to consciousness, so many different fields of altered states of consciousness and different ways to access them. So it's a complicated terrain. And this is why spiritual traditions have so much diversity and complexity to them. So many different teachings and techniques, different subtleties, nuances, and so forth. It really is a complex terrain. Think of it like mathematics. If you wanted to understand mathematics, you couldn't do it by watching one video or hearing some one piece of advice or some one truth about mathematics. No, mathematics is a complicated domain which includes a lot of subdomains and subfields that can be their own fields of study. You can spend the rest of your life, you can spend 50 years of your life just studying topology or differential equations or statistics or set theory, category theory, geometry, trigonometry, analytic geometry, algebra, various versions of algebra, various kinds of Boolean logics and so forth, right? There's so much to mathematics. You'd be hard-pressed to find one professor who understood all of mathematics and could teach it to you. Even if they understood it, how many hours, how many days, how many years do you have to learn it? Do you have 10 years to learn every field of mathematics? That would be very optimistic to say you could do it in 10 years. even if you could find a professor who understood it all. It's very complicated terrain. This creates a lot of confusion because people don't like to think that there's a complex terrain. They want to make it very simple. Like, oh, just Leo, sit and do nothing. There's nothing to do. You're already it. Blah, 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 blah. You're already enlightened. Blah, 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 blah. Right? This kind of neo-Advaita nonsense thinking that tries to oversimplify spirituality, that creates its own set of traps and problems. Another reason why there's so much confusion and misunderstanding is that human beings have different hardware. We have different genetics. We have different physiology, different chemicals and neurotransmitters in our brains in different levels. We have different childhood experiences growing up. We grew up in different cultures. So we're dealing with different substrates, so to speak, that we need to spiritualize, which means that different people will spiritualize that same substrate in different ways. Spirituality is deeply personal. You're the one who has to realize it. You're the one who has to dissolve your own ego and work through your inner demons. These are deeply personal things. All your obstacles are deeply personal. And no two people have the exact same obstacles. And in fact, no two people, I would submit, have access to the exact same spiritual insights. And there are very many possibilities of different ways that consciousness can be, different degrees of consciousness, different. I mean, people underestimate this, but we do have different hardware, so to speak, to work with. Despite the fact that I said that brains are conceptual and hardware, of course, is still conceptual, but we're just using this to try to explain that every individual needs to work through their own obstacles and issues. For some people, they're just born naturally more conscious, naturally more spiritual. Some people are born with a natural inclination to be really good at self-discipline, which tends to be a really important quality for spiritual practice. Some people are born and just are naturally born philosophers and are interested in questions of the metaphysical nature, like I think I was. And in that sense, I was very lucky. Whereas most people aren't born that way. A lot of people are born into terrible families, toxic families who brainwash them from an early age with all sorts of religious and scientific nonsense, which then is so hardwired into the human psyche so early on that by the time they're teenagers, good luck unwiring all that. It might take you a few decades to do that, if you're lucky and you succeed at all. So because of this, different spiritual teachers and traditions have different teachings. This creates confusion, adds complexity to the whole game. It's not just as simple as like, let me take every human in the world and just tell them a couple of things and then they're going to become enlightened. It doesn't work that way. It's much more complicated than that. The teaching needs to be highly custom tailored to the student so that they can make sense of it, especially because their mind is so tricky that their mind will find all sorts of excuses, rationalizations, and denials for avoiding doing the work. Another reason why there's so much misunderstanding and confusion is because, don't forget, our culture, even though we are in the 21st century, don't think that we're at the end of our evolution, societally speaking. We're still in the dark ages. Still in the dark ages. Yes, we've sent a man to the moon and we can make jumbo jets and iPhones and we've got the internet and all these gadgets and stuff, and we think that we're so sophisticated. But really, the level of cultural evolution is even more primitive than our technological level of evolution. Our cultures and societies are very, very primitive. Science is still very primitive. The scientific method itself is still primitive. It still doesn't recognize, for example, non-symbolic direct consciousness. Doesn't recognize it. In the same way that 300 years ago, science didn't recognize microscopes and telescopes as legitimate instruments for exploring and investigating reality. Just didn't recognize them. So, in the centuries to come, our culture and our science will evolve and change in such a way that it will be easy for future generations in, let's say, 500 years, it will be easy for them to understand what I'm talking about, but only because I've talked about it and I've popularized these ideas and I was at the cutting edge helping to promote these ideas, along with many other people who are doing the same thing that I am. And it's because of us, because we're walking around and kind of like blaring the trumpets about this thing called spirituality and awakening, and we're trying to show people how to do it properly so they don't delude themselves further, like many people in the past have. Thanks to those people, and maybe you'll be one of those if you get it one day, then thanks to those people, there will be evolution. Science will evolve, spirituality will evolve, religion will evolve, culture will evolve, we will move up the spiral dynamic stages and all that good stuff. And then it will be easy. The mistake people make is they just assume that, well, we're in the 21st century, we've figured everything out pretty much. Sure, there's some stuff science doesn't understand, maybe dark matter, dark energy, but that's not very important. Mostly we've got every reality figured out. We've got the scientific method figured out. Scientists know everything. Universities know everything. It's all been written down in the textbooks. There's nothing really important to discover. There's nothing that's going to recontextualize my entire reality. So it's like, no, you're taking it completely for granted. What you're doing is you're expecting culture to deliver truth to you on a silver platter. But that's just not how truth works. To expect that. You can't just sit back, play the skeptic, be fucking lazy, and sit there like a cynic, criticizing everything, not doing anything, acting like a smart aleck rationalist, and thinking that people need to come to you to prove the truth to you. With that attitude, you're never going to discover the truth. Not even in 500 years, when everybody around you discovers it. Because it's a deeply personal thing. Direct consciousness. That means you're involved. No one can do it for you. You can't read it in a textbook. So this immediately excludes 99% of people, because 99% of people just are accepting knowledge that human society has discovered. They don't actually do any independent investigation of anything because they're lazy and they believe that there's no purpose to do it. Leo, if I can just go watch a video, why would I even need to read a book? People are so lazy these days that they come up with excuses to me about why they shouldn't read books. That's the level of fucking laziness and complacency that we're seeing right now in 21st century society. And you're wondering how come you haven't seen the absolute? You're too lazy to read fucking 10 books. Coming up with bullshit excuses. Not to mention the thousands of hours of yoga or meditation that you might need to do to have a glimpse of the absolute. You expect a video to deliver this to you? Get the fuck out of here. No video is going to deliver this to you. No teacher's going to do it for you. No guru's going to do it for you. No one's going to do it for you unless you do it. So now you see that this excludes 99.99999% of people from ever accessing the truth. Immediately excluded because they're too fucking lazy and they don't have enough vision to see why an independent inquiry is worth their time and effort. There's also a lot of confusion and misunderstanding because it does take hardcore personal practice to realize and to actualize spirituality. Hard, self-disciplined, boring, excruciating, mind-numbing, lonely. You're all alone just sitting there for hours and hours and hours doing this practice. Again, this all immediately excludes 99.99999% of people from ever accessing the truth. They'll never do that. Immediately excluded. They can't justify to themselves. See, they have so little vision, they can't justify to themselves sitting down to do these practices. Can't do it. Can't motivate themselves. Can't do it consistently. Cannot spend 5 years of doing 1 hour a day of meditation without missing a single day. Can't do it. That excludes millions and billions of people right there. Just can't do that. Another reason there's so much confusion is because very paradoxically and unbelievably, it's because the truth is simply too good to believe. Too good. It's too good. It's way too good. The truth is so good, good with a capital G, so good that if I told you how good it was, you would say I'm full of shit. You would say I'm exaggerating. You would say I'm lying. You would say I'm being woo-woo. You'd say I'm being airy-fairy. But it would still be 1,000,000 times better than anything I could say. That's how good it is. So when you discover it, one of the first things that will cross your mind, if you're like me, is that you're gonna feel unworthy. You're gonna glimpse this truth, you're gonna see how good it is, and then you're gonna say, oh my God, this is impossible. This cannot be possible. I'm not worthy of anything this good. And so actually a lot of what spiritual work entails is opening yourself up, having enough self-esteem, building your self-esteem and self-worth to the point where you're actually able to accept something so good. How do you accept something infinitely good? You might say, oh, Leah, that's not a problem. I'll take the good stuff. Give me more good stuff. I can take it. No, you can't. You don't understand. Your ego is actually only used to a certain level of goodness that you can take in your life. Anything beyond that, and actually what your ego will do, it'll sabotage you to actually drop out of that state of pleasure and ecstasy and goodness and joy, and it'll drop you back down into your negativity, into your pessimism, into your all that petty, nasty, negative stuff that your ego does. So you got to raise yourself to be able to carry that. A good metaphor that I've heard other teachers use is the light bulb analogy. So, when you first start with spirituality and you start doing a little meditation, some psychedelics and so forth, it's sort of like you're coming to a power plant with a little light bulb and you want to plug that light bulb directly into the power plant. What happens? You do that and it immediately bursts because it's way too much power. Can't carry it. So the next time you go, oh shit, that was a lot of power. That was amazing, but it lasted too short. So the next time you come back with a bigger light bulb, you stick that in there and then it lasts for a minute and then it explodes again. You still can't carry the infinite energy that's being transmitted through it. So the next time, maybe a year later, you come back with a bigger light bulb. After doing a lot of inner work on yourself, you've expanded yourself, so now that is you becoming the bigger light bulb. You screw yourself into infinite source again, and it fries your brain in 5 minutes. And then you're like, shit, I got to go back to the drawing board and work on myself again so that next time maybe I can last 10 minutes. And you keep doing this over and over and over again until one day maybe you get to the point where you're able to screw yourself in and then you never get unscrewed. That energy will be coursing through you forever now. You have become and merged into that energy. That's what it's sort of like. And that's what a lot of the work entails, is opening yourself up to that infinite goodness, that infinite beauty, that infinite power, that infinite intelligence, the infinite creativity that's there, the infinite wisdom and insights, the infinite compassion, the omnipresence, the omniscience of it. It's all there. It's way too much for you to handle. It's way too much for any mere mortal to handle, unless they've done a lot of inner work. And lastly, the reason that it's so confusing and misunderstood, and everybody misses the truth, is because it is extremely threatening to your very life. Because after all, your life is a conceptual fabrication. So just try to imagine that if you were a conceptual fabrication, what might be your greatest enemy? What might be the thing you fear the most? What does a snail fear? A snail fears salt. What does a fire fear? It fears water. What does a shadow fear? It fears light. And what does a false ego fear? It fears truth. Why is it? Because it spells the demise. The light spells the demise of the shadow. So what does the shadow have to do? The shadow has to warp itself to convince itself that actually the light is the enemy, that the light is the evil. So the shadow will actually call the light shadow and call shadow dark or shadow light. You see, it has to call falsehood truth and truth falsehood. So most people simply resist the truth because they think it's falsehood, and they stick with the falsehood because they've called it the truth. This is the first trick that the devilish mind plays. Very tricky. Why is spirituality important? And Leo, how is it useful? You're saying, after all, that it's a sort of science, and science is useful. So how is spirituality useful? Is it falsifiable? Does it have any practical implications in my life? Why should I pursue this stuff beyond merely the feelings that you're talking about? Again, remember, the feelings are just a symptom of you actually being connected with the truth. So you're not really pursuing feelings in the pursuit of spirituality. What you're pursuing is the absolute truth. And then the feelings you get, that's just sort of the kicker, the little side dish, a little garnish, a little, cherry on top of your ice cream. It's the sort of the reward for being loyal to the truth. But anyways, there are some practical consequences. First of all, I want you to understand, and this is a very big point, that all human dysfunction comes from disconnection from the truth. Fundamentally, that's what it is. Whatever problems you think you have, whatever problems you think mankind and society and government has, they're all connected to the fact that mankind and society is disconnected from the truth. Falsehood creates sickness and disease, both figuratively and literally. Most of the diseases that we have, the physical hard diseases, I'm talking about cancer, heart attack, obesity, depression, schizophrenia, various kinds of autism and mental disorders, anxiety, panic attacks, fear, anger, craving, jealousy, pettiness, theft, criminality, rape, violence, torture, war, genocide, racism, slavery, corruption in the government, gang violence, white-collar crime. What do you think all this comes from? Oh, sure, there's a million different causes, but all of those go down to one root cause, which is disconnection from truth. A person who is connected to truth is not going to become a criminal. It's not going to become a thief or a rapist or depressed or angry or even be fat and obese. You know why you're fat and obese? Fundamentally, the root problem? Yeah, you could say you're eating too many calories and this and that. I mean, that's all true, but fundamentally, why? Because you're disconnected from the truth. You're using food as a substitute for truth to get the pleasure. The pleasure that truth should be giving you, you don't get. So instead, what you do is you go for food, or you go for drugs, or you go for TV, or porn, and some other addiction, or you go for some white-collar crime to pay for your fancy lifestyle, for your house, and for your trophy wife, and for this and that, and cars, and women, and so forth. See? Why do you think you get cancer? Cancer is one of those diseases that's very preventable. A lot of it has to do because you're disconnected with truth, the way you live your life, the way you use your mind. And you might say, oh, Leo, but cancer is about the toxins that are in the environment and this and that. That's right. And how do you think those toxins got into the environment? Who do you think polluted the environment? And for what reason? Because they were disconnected from truth. Now, I'm not saying that with spirituality, you have a 100% chance to cure all your cancer and all this. But I mean, certainly there are many, many examples of people who have cured terrible, crippling, life-threatening diseases, both physical ones and mental ones and emotional ones, through deep spiritual work. So even though there's no guarantee that your cancer will be cured, some forms of cancer, if you have terrible toxins and heavy metals in your body, then that might not be something you can cure with spiritual practice. But then again, some cancers just come from stress, overstress. Like you're going to work and you're dealing with all the crap at work for 20 years. That could definitely cause cancer. Or the fact that you're going to work and then you're eating terrible food, and maybe you're living in an environment that you shouldn't be living in because you're not very conscious and you're too lazy to move out to change your environment, and that gives you cancer. And certainly things like fear, anxiety, anger, craving, depression, all of these mental and psychosomatic issues, chronic fatigue, insomnia, fibromyalgia, various autoimmune disorders, a lot of these are directly from your disconnection from truth. Because you see, when you're disconnected from truth, it's not merely that you're disconnected from truth and you just sit around all day and just enjoy your life. No. When you're disconnected from truth, you're empty inside. So you're running around and chasing for some kind of substitute. And whatever substitute you're finding, it's usually a very toxic and poor substitute, whether it's video games, porn, heroin, opioids, whatever. We've got a terrible opioid epidemic right now, over 50,000 people every single year dying. Why is this happening? You might say, well, Leo, it's the fault of the pharmaceutical companies. By the way, a lot of these overdoses don't come from heroin, but from prescription pills that doctors are writing. That's right. I mean, there is a lot of corruption within the pharmaceutical industry for sure, and we do need to crack down on that with various forms of regulation. But the real root is that these people who are taking these drugs are disconnected from truth. If you were connected to truth, you wouldn't need opioids. You wouldn't need pills. If you were conscious enough, you would be able to transcend your pain and all your suffering, even terrible physical ailments. So that's extremely practical. What we're talking about here is we're talking about happiness, peace of mind, and the elimination of suffering. That's extremely practical. And that's one reason why people take on spirituality, is not because they're metaphysically curious, but simply because they're one of these rats who've been running around in this maze, like I've said before, and they come to a dead end in life, which is so terrible, so miserable, so much suffering, that they look for any escape, any solution to this suffering. Otherwise, they will kill themselves. By the way, we have record numbers of suicides every year as well, in the tens of thousands. Of course, that's because of disconnection from truth. All these mass shootings we have in schools, disconnection from truth. And so this rat gets stuck in this dead end and is suffering so much that simply out of desperation, pure desperation, as a last resort, it turns to spirituality. And maybe if it's lucky, it finds a good spiritual practice, and then it's able to break through. But many rats aren't able to do that simply because they don't really know how to do a serious, legit spiritual practice. So what they do is they just end up in a dead end, and they either suffer miserably for the rest of their life in some sort of dead end job, dead end relationship, abusive relationship, terrible career, whatever. They get saddled with all sorts of diseases and ailments that last them for the rest of their life, or they just commit suicide. They just commit suicide. So those are some pretty good reasons to practice spirituality if it allows you to transcend all that. And it does. It definitely does. In fact, in a sense, it's the only way that you can transcend all that stuff, because all that stuff is a construction of your own mind. All that stuff is a consequence of the false ways in which you're living your life. All the lies and self-deceptions and all the manipulative ego games you play, well, that's all catching up with you. The problem is that most people are playing this game so to the hilt, so absorbed into this game that they don't even realize that all these symptoms are symptoms of the way they're playing the game. They think that, no, Leo, this is just how reality is. It has to be this way. No, it doesn't. That's simply because you're playing the game that way that it is that way. Just that is a huge game changer to realize. Most people can't fathom how it is they create all their own suffering and all their own problems. They think it's externally imposed upon them by some horrible world. And then you start to hate the world and blame the world for all the evils and problems that exist. There are no evils and problems in the world. It's all a construction of your own mind, and it's all a factor and a function of how you've been playing the game. So if you hate the world and you think life is terrible, it's because you've been playing the game in the wrong ways. And I'm not blaming you for it. I'm just saying it is possible for you to wake up to that. That's actually a very positive truth, because it means you can awaken from it. If only you're mature enough to swallow that bitter pill and then roll up your sleeves and do some work. Another way that spirituality is useful and important is that all of reality strives towards union. All of it. Not just mankind, not just your mind, but all of reality. All creatures, all businesses, all governments, all cultures, everything. That's what evolution is. Evolution is fragmentation striving towards union. The entire universe is striving towards union. And so union means truth. So when you ignore that and you say, fuck union, I'm just going to walk around fragmenting everything. I don't give a fuck about the truth. What you're doing fundamentally is you are putting yourself on the wrong side of evolution and on the wrong side of history. And you better believe you're going to get punished by that, by evolution for that kind of arrogance. When you align yourself with evolution and with unification rather than fragmentation, then you put yourself in alignment with evolution and with truth, and then things go good for you in life. Not perfectly. There could still be horrible mistakes, and I'm not saying you're going to be perfect, but it's certainly be a lot better than if you reject unification. Another reason and way that spirituality is useful is universal love and compassion and true morality. If you care about these things, then spirituality is basically the only way you can get it. You cannot be a truly moral person without being highly conscious, nor can you be universally loving or compassionate. It's impossible. The ego will make it impossible. Love is inversely proportional to ego. Morality is inversely proportional to ego. Morality doesn't depend on how strictly you control yourself. It depends on your level of consciousness. So if your level of consciousness is low, but you control yourself a lot, you're going to fail to be a good human being. Whereas if you have a high level of consciousness, but you don't control yourself at all, you'll still be a pretty good human being. If you care about peak human performance in sports, in other domains, in business and art and elsewhere, this comes from consciousness. Peak human performance comes from being highly conscious within a specific domain, which requires spirituality. If you care about ecology and holism, that requires consciousness. If you want to be like a child again, if you had a good childhood, think back to what it was like to be 7, 10 years old, those magical years of your life where everything was new and fresh and magical and beautiful and wonderful. That's because your mind wasn't filled with all the materialist, dualistic, rationalist, atheistic, and cynical and other forms of of beliefs and ideas, including, of course, all the religious nonsense you've been taught, all the moralizations that you've been taught, all the things you've been told not to do, all the rules, all this, all that. That has robbed you of your connection to reality, which you actually had as a child, but then you lost through your teenage years, through your rocky adolescence, and through your early 20s and 30s. You can get that back through spiritual practice. So now you're starting to see why people might take spiritual practice seriously. There are some people who take it really seriously, who devote their whole life to it. Those are the smart ones, because they realize just how significant this domain is. Actually, it's the most significant domain of your life. It can transform everything. It can transform your life personally, it can transform society, everything. It's all there. The problem is that nobody wants it. Or maybe rather, nobody wants to pay the horrible egoic cost that it takes to acquire it. Let's wrap up by giving you this spirituality test that I've devised. This is a test to assess how much spirituality is really right for you. So it requires very simple answers on your part. It's simple questions. So you're going to be answering all these questions on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. So get out a piece of paper and just jot down your numerical answers to these questions. Okay, so question number 1 is, how much do you care about the truth? On a scale of 1 to 10. So if you care about it a lot, you put a 10. If you don't care about it at all, put a 1. Be honest. How much do you care about understanding existence? How much do you care about beauty with a capital B? Seeing beauty everywhere. Everywhere you look is beauty. How much do you care about goodness with a capital G? Being good and seeing goodness everywhere. How much do you care about being universally loving with a capital L? How much do you care about being healthy? Not just physically healthy, but emotionally healthy, psychically healthy, and of course, physically healthy. How much do you care about living in a healthy society and a healthy environment? How much do you care about overcoming anger, fear, anxiety, depression, loneliness, sadness, jealousy? How much do you care about being authentic? Being authentically you, without trying to please anybody else, without trying to be self-conscious or worrying about what anybody thinks of you or how anyone judges you. Just organically, naturally yourself. How much do you care about joy and peace of mind? How much do you care about being ultra creative, having amazing and profound insights, whether it's business, art, science, philosophy, spirituality, or anything? How much do you care about exploring reality? Whether it's physically, externally, or internally, exploring your own mind, exploring new realms of consciousness. How much does that excite you? How much do you love getting mind fucked? How much do you love wisdom? How much do you care about reducing the suffering of mankind? Or even animals, for that matter, if you're a fan of animals. How much do you love the feeling of being conscious? Think about some time in your life when you were really conscious, just consciousness purely for consciousness' sake. Is that something you love? How much do you want to be like a kid again? How much do you care about transcending dysfunction? How much do you want to go beyond petty human issues, all the mundane pettiness of life that you're inundated with every single day? How much do you want to transcend those? How much do you want to be passionate about life? That's the whole quiz. So take a look at your answers. If you have a lot of 10s and 9s and 8s across the board, then spirituality is for you. And if you don't care about these things, well, then stay away from spirituality. So again, now you can see why spirituality is something that people pursue seriously, that some people devote their entire life to. This is a very wise strategic move. If you're going to be planning your whole life from the very beginning to the very end, it would be a pretty wise move to say that you're going to invest a lot of your points, your skill points, into spirituality. But the problem is, the sad fact is that most people do. I mean, most people don't. Most people don't invest any points into spirituality. They dump their points into food, sex, shopping, TV, YouTube, video games, porn, etc., etc. And then they wonder why life sucks. Well, there you go. There's your answer. Because you invested your points into all the wrong areas. And the one right area where you should have invested them, you dismissed it as a stupid domain that wasn't worth your time. Well, there's your answer. There's your problem right there. Reallocate your points. You can respec your character at any time. It does get harder as you get older, but hey, better late than never, right? So now maybe you say, Leah, all this sounds pretty nice. I guess it makes sense. But I'm still skeptical. I don't know. It sounds kind of fishy. You're saying some things that are pretty far out there. How do I know you're right? How do I know you're not deluded? You want me just to believe you? No. You don't need to believe me at all. That's the beauty of the work, is that you do the work, and in the work is the result, which is self-validating. This is, after all, a science, which means that you're getting results and you're seeing with your direct consciousness what's really going on. This is an inquiry. Skepticism is good, you just need to use it in the right way. Turn your skepticism inwards on yourself, and then begin the process of spirituality. Do the research and do the practices. Don't have faith in me. You don't need to believe anything I say. But you do need to understand that to bootstrap yourself in this process, you do have to listen to some teachings, right? Because think about it. If you were trying to learn a complex topic like, let's say, calculus, and you sat there in class as the teacher was teaching you calculus, and you cynically doubted everything the teacher said, every sentence the teacher said, you just doubted, and you said, well, is that really true? How could that be true? Prove it to me. Where's the double-blind study that this is true? How do I know you're not full of shit? How do I know you're not lying? How do I know this isn't delusion? How do I know this isn't just woo-woo stuff? If you take that kind of attitude, you're never going to learn calculus. You need to have enough open-mindedness to be able to actually do the research, read the textbook, go through the examples, go through the proofs, think it through for yourself, and do the practices. Do the homework assignments. Only then can you learn. So that's what needs to happen here. Research and practice. Your goal right now should be to have your first mystical experience. This is a critical turning point in this journey. Have your first mystical experience. Only then do you know what we're really talking about. And even then, you don't know. You just have a little glimpse of something, but at least you have some idea now. You have some inkling. Just like with sex, you need to have your first orgasm. Then you discover the world of sex. And that's an exciting world. The world of sexuality, that's an exciting world to discover. But you haven't discovered it yet until you've had your first one. And if you want to do that quickly and effectively, what I recommend is LSD or mushrooms. Extremely effective for doing this, if used in the proper manner. That's an important qualification. I have an episode called How to Use Psychedelics for Personal Development. You can go check that episode out, which goes through various points and important guidelines for how to use psychedelics properly to have legitimate mystical experiences and how to interpret them properly. I'll also shoot some episodes in the future about how to really go deep with psychedelics, because I've been doing research on this a lot, both personally and theoretically, practically and theoretically. And I have a lot of, I think, useful insights for you, very practical insights for how to take your trips really deep. And so once you have that, then you have had your first mystical experience, and now you understand a little bit of what I'm talking about, and now you're ready to actually start to do the serious work. So I'm not saying that LSD or mushrooms are a shortcut and that you can use them to get all the way. I'm just saying it's a good entry point to having your first mystical experience. Then you start to understand, then you start to take this stuff seriously. Then you will really be invested in buying some books, watching some videos, taking some courses, traveling around the world, meeting the right people, gurus, this, practices, yoga, blah, 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 all these things. And then you're good. Then you're good. Now you're on your way. There can be no true spirituality without hardcore practice. Don't buy into the lies and simple solutions that the neo-Advaitins try to give you, where they say that there's nothing to do, there's no practices, there's nothing hardcore, you just, you're already enlightened. Don't buy into that nonsense. If that were true, then what the fuck would we be doing here? Why am I here? Why am I even talking about this stuff if this is true? Of course, in another sense, it is true, but you're going to need to do a lot of hardcore practice before you realize that it's true. From your point of view, it's not true. From their point of view, it's true. From an enlightened person's point of view, it's true, but not from an unenlightened person's point of view. In the same way that for a calculus professor, solving some calculus equation is really fucking easy, because they already know the answer. It's really easy because they spent 20 years doing the practices and have figured everything out. So for them, it's really easy. But then when you give a child a calculus problem, it's impossible. It's impossible. You got to work up to it. Now, of course, don't turn this into a limiting belief as though you have to work for 10 years to have your first mystical experience or something. No, I mean, do it as soon as you can. So don't waste your time. It's going to happen right now if it's ever going to happen. But also be prepared to put in the work. And remember to educate yourself about this field. It's not enough just to do the practices. It's not enough to watch a few videos. You need to do some serious research, some serious reading. You need to read at least 20, 30, 50 books on this topic to really start to understand the various traps that are involved and what you're really dealing with. Just conceptually to understand it, let alone, I'm not even talking about actually experiencing it, just to start to understand it. Because you're going to be very confused when you start. You're not going to know who's right, who's wrong. You know, mystical teachings could be notoriously murky and confusing and tricky, and that's because that's sort of the nature of the beast. That's not because the teacher is deliberately trying to mislead you or trying to be tricky or abstract. That's just simply because we're working with your mind here, and your mind is a tricky beast. That's all that means. So educate yourself properly. Read the right books, and if you need ideas for that, check out my book list at Actualized.org. All right, so that's it. We're done here. Please click that like button for me, don't forget, and then come check out Actualized.org. There you'll find my book list, my blog, where I'm posting interesting insights and videos. Additional exclusive videos will be posted there soon. And my life purpose course is there. Come check out the forum. You can ask various questions and get guidance and advice. And the last thing I'll tell you is stick with me as I release more content. If you do, I'll promise you this, if you take this work seriously, you don't just dabble in it, but you take it seriously, you will come out in a few years with a deeper understanding of reality than professors and academics and PhDs at MIT and Caltech and the best universities in the world. You might say, oh, Leo, but this sounds outrageous. How dare you say such things? This is so arrogant, so cocky and egotistical of you to make such claims. How can you possibly make such claims? I'm not doing it from a position of arrogance. I'm just trying to make you aware of the significance of this work. The problem with these professors and academics in all these top-notch research universities is that they're extremely narrowly specialized and they're very siloed. And they take a very analytical, non-holistic approach to thinking about their field. And also, they have consigned themselves to this bureaucracy, to this system. So really, even though they might think that they're pursuing truth, they're not. And you might think that they're pursuing truth, but they're not. What they're pursuing is they're pursuing some narrow, pragmatic scientific achievement within their narrow little subspecialty, which has nothing to do with deep metaphysical existential truths. So these professors, whether they're doing quantum mechanics or evolution or biology or chemistry or anthropology or sociology or psychology, whatever, they surely have read a ton of books and they know a lot of facts. They know a lot of technical minutia. They can out-argue you and they can out-debate you and they can out-cite you. But what they can't do is they can't actually explain what reality is. They don't know. They just don't know. Because they've consigned themselves to this system, this bureaucracy, this academic ideology, this materialism, this rationalism, this desire to quantify all of reality, this desire to demystify all of reality, academic philosophy. There's almost no serious metaphysics being done in universities today because it's groupthink. It's a bureaucracy. You don't get paid to pursue the absolute truth. You get paid to deliver particular narrow results which help the ego to survive. Whether it's the business ego, the academic ego, or some other kind of ego. That's what universities are about. And there's nothing really wrong with that. We do need this technical knowledge. So these professors, we still need them. Just don't think that they're going to be able to explain metaphysics to you because they don't understand it themselves, because they have tricked themselves into thinking that it's worthless, that there's nothing valuable to be found there, and that it's just delusion. Well, that's their delusion, is to think that metaphysics is delusion, because they don't know how to do metaphysics properly. And even the philosophers, the ones in universities who are supposed to be good at this stuff and are supposed to get it, they still don't get it. This is rare stuff. So the reason I'm saying this is not to brag, but simply to remind you of the significance of what is on offer here on this channel with Actualized.org. It's very rare and lucky that you found this resource however you did. You probably just stumbled upon it blindly, by accident. And while that's extremely good fortune for you, because many of your friends never will, there's a risk. The risk is that you've stumbled upon a pile of gold, but you're so myopic and you lack vision so much that you are not going to be able to appreciate what's here, and you're not really going to take it seriously and act upon it. And therefore, you're going to miss out on the greatest thing that you could find in reality. So what I recommend is that you really think about what's on offer here for free. All these hundreds of videos that I released for free that meticulously break down all these topics in a way that makes sense to scientifically minded, rationally minded, atheistically minded people, skeptically minded people, because that's where I come from. That's why I explain this stuff this way, because I know how to communicate to you, because that's how I think, and that's how I thought. And so what I'm doing here is I'm building a bridge between the spiritual realm and the analytical scientific realm. That's what I'm doing. So we're going to continue to do that. There's still a lot more topics to talk about. Don't think that we've covered everything yet. There's always more. There's hundreds more. I have lists of hundreds of topics that we need to talk about, very important topics that you still have no clue about. So we'll be covering those in the months and years to come. for however long I'm doing this. And if you stick with me, you will, I'm telling you, you will develop a deeper understanding of reality, of yourself, of your mind, of spirituality, of metaphysics, of science even. You will understand science better than the top-notch scientists in universities. That doesn't mean you're going to understand their specific specialty better. It means you're going to understand science as a whole because you're going to understand how the human mind works and the way paradigms work. You're going to understand that better than these professors and academics. And if you are one of these professors and academics and scientists, watch out, be careful. Because there's a very good reason that this stuff is not taught in universities. It's not compatible with what's taught in universities. So if you think that you're going to bring this into a university environment, watch out. They don't tolerate mysticism. They don't tolerate spirituality. That's not by accident. That's by design. That's by design. They're going to tar and feather you and demonize you. They're not going to give you tenure. You're not going to have a successful career because you can't do this in a bureaucracy. If you could, religion would be successful. Can't do it. Truth doesn't work that way. Truth is a deeply personal thing, and it's a very radical thing, and you got to be a maverick to pursue the truth. You know, when I was really into philosophy, I seriously thought about becoming a philosophy professor. That's really what I should have been. Instead, I became Actualized.org. And I'm so glad I became Actualized.org. And actually, this was done by design. The reason I didn't become a philosopher professionally, a professor of philosophy, is because I saw when I was about 20 years old and I was making this decision, I very clearly saw that I would not be allowed to pursue the truth in its full glory in a university setting. And so I said to myself, well, that answers the question about whether I want to be a professor or not. And so I didn't go into that because I knew that if I did, I would consign myself to a life of misery and delusion. And I'm really glad for making that choice. The only reason that we can do what I'm doing here today is precisely because I'm independent, precisely because I'm not beholden to any kind of advertisers or money interests or universities, bureaucracies, or anything like that. Because if I were, then that's what corrupts the truth. So you got to put the truth number one if you're a truth seeker, which means that if you're going to do that, you got to make yourself independent so that you're not somebody's little bitch and you got to jump through the little fucking hoops in life, earning crumbs so that you can just barely survive. See, most people consign themselves to wage slavery in one system or another, and then what happens is that they don't have time. They don't have the luxury to pursue the truth because they're someone's little bitch for the rest of their life until they retire, maybe. And by that point, they're too old, it's too late, their mind is too dull, they don't care anymore. They're so depressed and miserable that they're a lost cause. But anyways, so now you understand what's at stake. Make sure you stick around, and more exciting stuff to come.